Deep in the remote forests of West Virginia, a trained search and rescue team was sent to find a missing hiker. They were experienced, they were equipped, they were in constant communication. But somewhere, between the trees and the darkness, something found them first. One moment, a radio transmission. The next, silence. And then, one of their own was gone. No struggle. No footprints. No trace. What happened to the missing team member that night has never been explained. Not by investigators, not by forest rangers, not by anyone. This is the story the world almost forgot, and the one that no one who was there can bring themselves to fully remember. Before we begin, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city, your country, or even just your time zone down in the comments below. Are you watching this at midnight, lights off, phone under the covers? Or maybe with all the lights on because you already know what kind of story this is going to be. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, welcome. You are not alone. At least, probably not. Now let us begin. There is a specific kind of silence that only exists deep inside a forest at night. Not the silence of an empty room or the quiet of a sleeping house. This is older than that, heavier. It presses against your ears like something alive, and when it breaks even for just a moment, it does not feel like relief. It feels like a warning. The forests of West Virginia have always carried that kind of silence. Stretching across thousands of acres of dense Appalachian wilderness, these are places where the trees grow so thick that sunlight can barely find the ground, where hollows and ridgelines twist geography into something disorienting, where locals have, for generations, told stories of things seen between the trees that they could not explain and chose not to repeat too loudly. These are old woods, and old woods have long memories. What happened there in the autumn of 2014, according to informal accounts shared among emergency responders and outdoor communities, is not a story that made the national headlines in any significant way. It did not become a viral news event. There was no dramatic press conference, no government investigation was publicly announced. But among the people who were there, among the team members who lived through that night and came home one person short, it has never been forgotten. It cannot be forgotten, because no one in all the years since has been able to explain what they saw. The call came in on a Thursday evening. A hiker, a man in his late 30s, experienced by most accounts, familiar with backcountry travel, had failed to return from a solo day hike in a remote section of the Monongahela National Forest region. His vehicle was found at a trailhead, his planned route was known. His expected return time had passed by more than 12 hours. By all standard protocols, the search and rescue activation was entirely appropriate. The team that was assembled that night was not a group of volunteers with flashlights and good intentions. These were trained professionals, search and rescue coordinators, wilderness trackers, emergency medical technicians, people who had done this kind of work for years. Some of them had been on dozens of deployments. They knew forests, they knew panic, and they knew procedure. They were exactly the kind of people you would want searching for someone you loved. The team leader, we will call him Marcus, as names in accounts like this are rarely released, had been in search and rescue for nearly 9 years. He had worked recovery operations, swift water rescues, cliff rescues. He had seen people in the worst conditions imaginable, and he had brought them home. He was steady, he was methodical. He was not the kind of man who rattled easily. The team deployed just before 9 in the evening. There were 6 members in total. Each was equipped with a radio, a headlamp, a GPS device, emergency supplies, and standard tracking tools. They entered the forest on 2 parallel tracks, spread enough apart to cover a wider search corridor while maintaining visual and audio contact with one another. Marcus maintained base radio communication. The protocol was simple and effective. Check in every 15 minutes, report any relevant findings, keep moving. For the first 2 hours, the operation proceeded exactly as it should have. The forest was cold that night, somewhere in the low 40s, and a thin mist had settled into the lower elevation areas between the ridges. Standard conditions for that time of year. The team moved steadily, calling the missing hiker's name, scanning with their headlamps, watching the ground for disturbance, broken branches, anything that might indicate a trail. Nothing of particular note was reported. The forest was quiet. Unusually quiet, a few team members would later reflect, but at the time, no one thought anything of it. It was just after 11 in the evening when things began to change. One of the team members, a woman we will call Dana, a skilled tracker with 7 years of experience, was moving along the eastern side of the search corridor. She was approximately 300 yards from the nearest team member. Radio contact was clear. There was nothing unusual about her position or her assignment. She had checked in exactly on schedule 15 minutes prior, reporting nothing of note. At 11:08, Dana's voice came over the radio. Her tone was measured, as it always was, but there was something underneath it, a quality that Marcus would later describe as careful, like she was choosing her words very deliberately. She said she could see a light. Not a headlamp, not a flashlight, something she described as a soft, moving glow, roughly 50 to 60 feet ahead of her, deeper in the trees. She said it was not stationary. It was moving slowly, horizontally, along what appeared to be a natural game trail running parallel to the ridgeline. Marcus asked her to hold position. Standard procedure: do not approach unidentified light sources or persons in the field without backup. He asked the nearest team member to begin moving toward Dana's last known GPS coordinates. He asked Dana to confirm she was stationary and to keep reporting what she saw. Dana confirmed she was holding. She described the light continuing to move. She said it seemed almost like a lantern, soft, amber-toned, not the blue-white of modern LED equipment. She said she could not see anyone carrying it. No silhouette, no sound of footsteps, no voices, just the light moving between the trees. And then, at 11:12, Dana's transmission stopped. Not interrupted, not broken by static, not cut off mid-sentence. It simply stopped. One moment she was speaking, the next there was nothing. No click of a radio being deactivated. No sound of movement or struggle. No final word, just the absence of her voice where her voice had been. Marcus called her name, no response. He called again, nothing. He immediately directed 2 team members to converge on her last GPS coordinates and ordered the third to hold their position as a fixed reference point. He himself began moving toward her location from his position at the northern end of the search corridor. When they reached the coordinates, and this took approximately 11 minutes, moving quickly through dark and unfamiliar terrain, Dana was not there. The headlamp she had been wearing was found lying on the ground. It was still on. Its beam pointed at a slight upward angle toward the trees, as if it had simply been set down or had fallen from approximately head height. The radio she had been carrying was found 2 feet away in the leaf litter beside the trail. It was also on, it was also undamaged. There was no indication that it had been thrown or dropped in a hurry. It appeared, to all who looked at it, to have been placed there almost gently. The team searched the immediate area on foot for 45 minutes before calling in additional support. They called Dana's name continuously. They shone their lights into every direction. They examined the ground with the careful attention of people who knew exactly what signs of human movement look like in a forest at night. There were no footprints leading away from the spot. This is not a detail that can be explained away easily. Search and rescue professionals understand tracking. They know that in a forested area with a soil base of decomposed leaf matter, damp with autumn moisture, footprints do not simply fail to appear. Every member of the team was able to find their own footprints from where they had walked to approach the location. Dana's footprints were present up to approximately 8 feet from where her equipment was found. And then they stopped. Not gradually, not trailing off into harder ground. They simply stopped, as if she had stepped forward 8 feet and been removed from the ground entirely. No equipment was missing other than what was on her person, her gloves, her jacket, her personal pack. Her radio, her headlamp, her GPS device, all left behind. No sounds had been heard by any team member during the time of her disappearance. No scream, no impact, no voice. The forest, already unusually quiet, had apparently absorbed whatever happened to Dana without releasing a single sound. The extended search that followed was significant. Additional teams were brought in before midnight. By 2 in the morning, there were more than 20 people covering the surrounding terrain in a systematic grid. Dogs were brought in at first light. The dogs trained tracking animals that had worked dozens of searches behaved in a way that their handlers found deeply disturbing. At the location where Dana's equipment had been found, the dogs would not work. They circled the perimeter of the area, refusing to enter it, pressing close to their handlers in a way that one handler described as the behavior of an animal that is frightened. Not cautious, frightened. The distinction, to someone who has worked with tracking dogs for years, is immediately apparent. The dogs picked up no trail leading away from the location, in any direction. It was during the extended overnight search that the other lights were seen. 3 separate team members at different times and different locations reported seeing moving lights in the forest. All 3 described them independently and with consistent detail: soft, amber-toned, moving slowly and horizontally between the trees, roughly at the height a person might carry a lantern. None of the lights appeared when a team member moved directly toward them. They would simply stop appearing, the way a reflection in water disappears when the angle changes. One team member, a man named in informal accounts only as Reyes, said he watched one of the lights for close to 4 minutes before it vanished. He said it moved in a way that did not feel purposeful, in the way that a person walking with a lantern would feel purposeful. It felt, he said, more like the movement of something that was observing slow, horizontal, unhurried, as though it was watching the searchers the same way the searchers were watching it. No source for the lights was ever identified. No other search teams, civilian or otherwise, were assigned to that section of the forest that night. All other active search personnel were accounted for at the times the lights were observed. No recreational campers or hikers were identified in the area. The terrain made vehicle access essentially impossible. There was no infrastructure, no roads, no trails, no structures within the area where the lights were seen. The search for Dana continued for 11 days. 11 days of systematic coverage. Aerial support, additional tracking resources, interviews with local residents who knew the area, review of all available satellite imagery, examination of every possible theory medical episode, disorientation, accidental fall into concealed terrain, animal encounter. Each theory was examined and, in the professional assessment of the people conducting the search, found to be inadequate to explain the evidence as it existed. Dana was not found. No remains. No personal effects beyond what was left at the scene. No trace of any kind in any direction from the last known location. It was as if the forest had simply accepted her, quietly and completely, and closed over her like water closing over a stone. The official documentation of this case, to the extent that it is accessible, contains language that is carefully neutral. Search concluded without recovery. Subject location unknown, standard bureaucratic phrasing that describes, without explaining, the outcome of 11 days of intensive effort. There is no official explanation. There is no section of any report that ventures a theory. The case is listed in whatever filing system holds it as unresolved. Marcus gave an informal account of the events roughly 2 years later, in a private conversation with another search and rescue professional that was later shared in a limited way within the community. He said that in 9 years of search and rescue work, he had seen many things that were difficult to explain: disorientation that seemed impossible, survival that defied medical logic, terrain that behaved in ways that did not match any map. But he said that what happened in that forest that night was different in kind, not just degree. He said the word he kept returning to, even years later, was not mysterious. It was not strange. The word he kept returning to was wrong. He said it felt wrong. The way something feels wrong before you can articulate what is wrong about it. The forest felt wrong. The silence felt wrong. The lights felt wrong. And the absence of Dana, so complete, so clean, so inexplicably total, felt like the wrongest thing he had ever witnessed in his professional life. He has not returned to that section of forest. He has spoken to several of the other team members over the years. None of them have returned either. The missing hiker who originally prompted the search, the man whose failure to return had set the entire operation in motion, was found 3 days after Dana's disappearance approximately 4 miles from where she vanished, alive and physically unharmed. He had no memory of how he had spent the time. He could recall reaching a certain ridge on his hike, and then nothing until he found himself sitting at the base of a tree with no idea where he was or what time it was. His watch had stopped. His food and water were almost entirely untouched, despite his having been missing for days. He did not appear to have lost weight. He had no injuries. He was simply back, without knowing how he had been gone or where he had been. He was asked during the debriefing that followed his rescue whether he had seen or heard anything unusual during his time in the forest. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. He said he remembered lights, soft, amber-colored, moving between the trees. He said he had followed them or felt as though he had been led by them. He could not be entirely sure which. He said they had felt, in whatever fractured memory remained to him, like something that was guiding rather than threatening, like a hand in the dark rather than a thing to run from. He was asked whether he had seen anyone else while he was in the forest. Another long silence. He said he thought he might have. He said there was a figure, or the impression of a figure, that he associated with the lights, but when he tried to bring it into focus in his memory, it dissolved, like trying to remember a dream 2 hours after waking. The shape of it remained, but the detail was gone. He was not asked to elaborate further on that particular point. The debrief was focused on his own condition and his route. The detail was noted and apparently filed alongside everything else that could not be explained quietly, without comment, in the category of things that happened and were not understood. West Virginia has a longer history than most people outside its borders fully appreciate. The Appalachian Highlands have been inhabited for thousands of years. Long before European settlement, long before the trails and the roads and the fire towers that now give the illusion of human dominion over the landscape, people lived in these mountains and forests and knew them with an intimacy that modern visitors do not approach. And the oral traditions passed down through those communities, both the indigenous peoples who came first and the generations of Appalachian settlers who came after, are consistent in one respect that is rarely discussed in polite company. These forests, particularly in the deep remote sections where the land has never been substantially cleared or developed, are understood to be inhabited by something, not in the way that wildlife inhabits a forest. In a different way, an older way, something that has been there longer than the oldest tree, longer than the oldest story told about it. Different communities have different names for it. Different frameworks for understanding what it is and what it wants, if wanting is even the right concept. Some traditions speak of it with reverence, some with caution. Almost none speak of it with contempt, because the people closest to these lands have always understood, in a way that perhaps more modern people have forgotten, that contempt is not something you extend toward things that are older and larger than yourself. Whether any of that is relevant to what happened to Dana and to the missing hiker and to the lights that move between the trees that autumn night, no one can say with any certainty. The connection, if it is a connection, cannot be proven. It is offered here not as an explanation, but as a context, a reminder that the people who knew these forests best never made the mistake of assuming they fully understood them. The case, as noted, remains unresolved. Dana has not been found. The forest is still there. And if you were to go there now, if you were to walk into that section of Appalachian wilderness on a cold autumn night, with the mist settling into the hollows and the silence pressing in around you like a held breath, you would find it exactly as it was. Old, dense, patient. Waiting, perhaps, for the right question to be asked. Or perhaps simply waiting. The lights have been reported in that area since. Not frequently. Not by anyone who knew what they were looking for. A hiker who posted on a trail forum sometime in 2018 about an amber glow she saw moving through the trees at dusk, which disappeared when she tried to walk toward it. A local hunter in an interview with a regional podcast in 2021 who mentioned casually that there was a section of ridgeline he had stopped visiting because of what he called the lanterns, and when pressed, could not explain them any further than that, except to say that you did not follow them, that everyone who knew the area understood you did not follow them, and that he was not going to say any more about it than that. No one has said any more about it than that. Not officially, not on record, Not in any way that would require anyone to explain what they believe is happening in those trees, or what took Dana, or what kept the missing hiker suspended in a gap of days with no memory and no hunger and no sense that time had passed. There are things that happen at the edge of the wilderness that do not fit into the language we have built for the world we think we live in. And perhaps that is not a failure of explanation. Perhaps that is simply an acknowledgement that the map is not the territory, that the world is older and stranger and more dimensioned than the neat categories we have created to contain it. Somewhere in West Virginia, a forest is breathing in the dark. The trees are standing exactly as they have stood for centuries, indifferent to our schedules and our radios and our carefully organized search grids. The mist is settling into the hollows, and somewhere in that darkness, something that does not need to explain itself is moving quietly between the trees, carrying a soft amber light, going wherever it is going, and no one who knows the forest well enough is going to follow it. This story is told not to frighten, but to remind you of something quietly beautiful, that the world is far larger, far older, and far more full of mystery than any of us will ever fully understand. And there is a certain peace in that if you let yourself feel it. The unknown does not always mean danger. Sometimes it simply means that the universe is wider than our words for it. So wherever you are tonight, whether the lights are on or off, whether you are in a city or a small town or somewhere with trees just outside your window, take a slow breath. You are safe, you are home. And whatever questions the darkness holds, they will still be there tomorrow. For now, let them rest. Close your eyes. The forest can keep its secrets a little while longer. Good night. Sleep gently. And thank you for being here.